Video we'll be covering Module 3 on flowcharting. So flowcharting is basically a pictorial representation of a program. So in short, it's a picture of the steps in a program. The problem statements that we looked at earlier when you determined your input, your output, and the processing steps, it's simply a way of visually organizing those components. It uses geometric shapes connected with arrows, and each shape represents a different category of keywords or actions. This image shows the flowchart shapes that are used in the program Flowgorithm, which you'll be using for all your assignments. And even though other flowcharting programs may use slightly different shapes, generally they're very similar to the one shown below. They usually try to keep them in a very similar standard. So here are two example flowcharts based on the two problem statements that we looked at earlier in Module 1. The first one is for the problem statement, get 3 numbers from the user, add them together, and display their total. The other is have the user enter the name of their pet and the type of animal it is, and then display a message using the pet's name and type, such as Spot is the cutest dog ever. So on this slide, when you download the PowerPoint, you can use this kind of as a reference, but we're actually going to look in Flowgorithm at how we would create each of these flowcharts based on the problem statement. So if you don't already have the program Flowgorithm, you can go to this website, flowgorithm.org, and this is their homepage. You'll see the download tab right here. If you click on that, you have the option for the Windows installer, and once you download that, you can simply walk through the installation wizard and it'll install it for you. I wanted to point out the Flowgorithm website mainly because there is also a lot of documentation and resources for Flowgorithm. So under documentation, you'll see it has categories, basics, data types, identifiers, and keywords, basic shapes, so on and so forth. There's also an entire Flowgorithm online manual website, so it really helps you to learn how to use the program. Of course, I'll be giving you instruction through videos, but if you need additional help or you want to play around with it yourself, these are great resources for understanding how Flowgorithm works and how it runs your programs and how you can accomplish what you want to do with your program. So make sure you make use of this website. Once you have downloaded and installed Flowgorithm, this is how the program looks. It always starts with main and end. So these two shapes simply signal the beginning and the end of your program. Now you'll notice when I hover the mouse over the arrow in between these two shapes, it lights up and I can click that. And that's where this picture in the PowerPoint came from, with the shapes that we can choose from. Now, we will get more into these shapes further on the right side as we move through the course, because the if structure and the loops are more in depth. So we'll discuss those later. For now, we're going to be using these 4 main shapes here. Our input, output, and our shapes for variables to declare and assign variables. So as you remember, we talked about input and output, how we identify those. So if we look back at our problem statement here, for our first example, it says get 3 numbers from the user, add them together, and display their total. So we previously identified that we will need 3 numbers. Those are our input. We have to get those from the user. Any data has to be stored as a variable, so we know that we will need 3 variables for those numbers, one for each number because they will be different numbers that the user will input. So back in our Flogorithm program, we can click that arrow, and the first thing we want to do is declare, because remember, before we can use a variable, we have to declare it. When I click on that shape, it puts it into my flowchart, and to edit the details of it, I double click on it. When I double click a declare shape, it allows me to choose a variable name. So in this case, I want to choose first number. And remember, according to our variable naming convention, there's no spaces, and I'm using camel case. And then I can choose a data type. So I can choose between integer, real, string, or Boolean. Now, we didn't really talk about Boolean, but basically that is a true or false value. You won't really be using that one in your assignment, so just focus again on the integer, real, and string. So in this case, I'm going to keep this pretty basic and just choose integer, because these are numbers. I will be using them in a calculation, but I don't really care if they include the decimal points. There's also a checkbox for array, but again, that will be in a later module where we'll use that. So once I've put in my variable name and chosen the data type, I can click OK. And now you can see it changes to include those details. I'll do the same thing for second number and third number. Once I've declared all three variables, I can then use those variables. So where do I want to get the information from? Well, I'm supposed to get those three numbers from the user. So that is where my input box would come in. So if I click on that, double click it to edit, all I have to do here is enter the variable name. So what is the first variable that I want to ask the user to put a value in for? I'll choose first number. Okay, and then I will do the same thing for second number and third number. Now that I've had the user input their three numbers, I can use those values in a calculation. Now remember, according to our problem statement, the goal is to add those three numbers together and display their total. So I need a place to store that total. So I'm going to again declare a new variable, and this one I'm just going to call total. I'll leave it as an integer because my three numbers that will be calculated are also integers. And then I'm going to choose a different shape because the user has already provided the three numbers, so we're not going to use input for this. This is a calculation that will be done by the program, so we'll be using the assign shape. So assign, when you open it up, you'll notice it takes the form of like a mathematical equation. So I'll put my variable name that I want to store this value in on the left side, which is going to be total. Expression is where we define how we will assign this value. So the total should be the first number plus the second number plus the third number. So in Flogorithm, you can use the regular math symbols. So we can write first number plus second number plus third number. Now, if you are including in your calculation some other numbers, like for example, if you were trying to double a number that the user puts in, you could use the multiplication sign and use the number 2. So that also works in here. The order of operations does apply, so if you needed something to calculate first, you would put it in parentheses, just like in math class when you learned the order of operations. Parentheses go first, then exponents, which you're not really using exponents in here, but then multiplication, division, and addition, subtraction last. So just keep that in mind, that if you are trying to write a calculation that will require several steps, you need to pay attention to the order of operations. In this case, it's not that complicated. We're just adding the three numbers. And once we have that expression written, we can click OK. And now, whatever values are stored in these three numbers that the user put in, the total will equal the addition of those three numbers, and it will be stored in that variable. So we've accomplished the task, but there's one thing missing. If we look back at our PowerPoint, the last part of the problem statement is to display the total. So our final step is that we need to display this number on the screen. So for this, we'll choose the output shape. And the output shape has quite a bit of options that you can use, and we'll explore those as we go through the course. But in its simplest form, we can just write the name of a variable, and it will display the value stored in that variable. So we'll just put total, and I'll click OK. And now, the great thing about Flogorithm, and the reason you'll be using it primarily in this class for your assignments, is because Flogorithm allows you to run the code in your flowchart. So it's a very simple way to lay out your program and then be able to run it. So up here at the top left, you'll see the Run button. And if I click that, now Flogorithm, here at the very bottom, it tells you kind of what step you're on. So it says, please enter a value of type integer for first number. So I'm going to enter 2. And you can see my input on the right side of the screen. Then it says for second number, so I'll put 3. And then I'll put 4 for third number. And then it gives me the output over here where it added those three numbers together, and it's 9. And you'll notice the enter button is grayed out, so if I want to test this multiple times, I have to come back up here to the top and click run again, because once it reaches the end shape, that indicates the end of the program, so you have to start it again if you want to test it again. Now, Flogorithm is very helpful because it does kind of give you that feedback at the bottom to tell you what step you're on. But if this were a real program, the computer would not be giving the user any information really about what they are supposed to type in. So you can also use the output shape to display anything on the screen, even like instructions for the user. So here above first number, I could use output to say, please enter a number. And we have to put that in quotation marks. So any text that you want to display exactly as it is, you have to put it in quotation marks. All right, now I can click OK, and it will output, please enter a number. So now if I run this program, there it gives me instructions, please enter a number. And I could do that for each of the numbers to say, please enter a second number, please enter a third number. So that just gives the user a little more feedback on how they're supposed to interact with this program. Also with the output, I can add more than just the variable name in order to explain what output the program is providing. So as you saw when we ran the program the first time, it showed the total, but it just showed the number, so it was 9, I think, and no other information. So how do I know what the program did with the input that I gave it? So instead of just putting total, I can actually combine this with some text. So I'll say the sum of the three numbers you entered is, and I'll end my quotes. Now, to combine text in quotation marks and information from a variable, you use the ampersand or the and sign. So notice a couple of things here. There are no spaces in between the ampersand and the variable name or the information in quotation marks, but any spaces that I want to include to separate this number in the sentence, I have to include in the quotation marks. So that way things are spaced as they should be and just the format looks as it should. But ampersand is how you can join the quotes, the quotation marks, and a variable. So now if I click OK, I'm going to run this again, and I didn't add the extra prompts here, but this is just to show you the idea. So I'll enter those numbers again, and now it tells me the sum of the three numbers you entered is 9. So that number will change as I run the program with different numbers. This time the sum of the three numbers you entered is 19. So it will always print the exact text that is in quotation marks, but when you combine that with a variable, it will adjust the value of the variable as the value changes. Now when you go to submit your assignments, there are a few things that you'll need to submit. First of all, I suggest saving your Flowgorithm program as a Flowgorithm program that can be edited. So this save button is how you will do that. You'll type in a file name, save it where you want. You'll notice that the FPRG format, that is your program that can be edited. So you want to save it as that so that you can go back in and edit it if you need to, or if you just want to play around with it, add more to the program, you can do that. So save it that way first. You can also go to Tools and Export to an image file. This is what you want to do to submit your actual flowchart for your assignment, simply because this is an easier way for me to open it. Now, this is just kind of the details of the colors and the text size and the margins. Usually you can just leave this on the default. Then you click Create, and now you'll see that you can save the flowchart as an image, and it has the PNG file format. So again, you'll type in a file name, and it will this time save it as a PNG. Now the PNG is what you want to submit to the assignment Dropbox. I'm just going to hit cancel on this for now. And then finally, I also want you to run the program, and whatever the final result is, your final output, I want you to take a screenshot of that. Screenshots, depending on the computer, may be a little different, the key combination, but usually there is a print screen button on your keyboard. If you're not sure, you can always Google how to do it on your specific computer. But take a screenshot of your results and submit that as well, just to show that you tested out your program and that it worked appropriately. Now, let's look at our other example briefly. So our other problem statement was have the user enter the name of their pet and the type of animal it is, and then display a message using the pet's name and type, such as Spot is the cutest dog ever. Now this is not going to be that different. We'll start out again declaring the variables that we need. So again, we determined that we need the pet name and the pet type. Those are the inputs that we're getting from the user, so those are the variables that we need to create to store those values. So we'll create a pet name variable, and this time I will want to change the type to string, because this will be a string value that has characters in it, letters. I'll do the same thing for pet type. And then we can get those as input from the user, just like we did with the numbers. Okay, so that will get that information from the user. Our next step is to display a message using the pet's name and type. So the message is our output, and we need to create this message that will update the pet name and type in this sentence based on what the user enters as input. So the way we can do that is we'll use the output symbol, and we'll open that up. So the first thing we know is that the pet name will be changing depending on who's using the program. So we'll reference the pet name variable. And remember, we use the ampersand to combine that with text in quotation marks. So I will start my quotes. I want to have a space in between the pet name word and the rest of my sentence. So I'll put that space in there, and then is the cutest, and I'll need to add another space for the next word. I'll end my quotation marks, put another ampersand, and now I need to reference the pet type variable. And then I will add another ampersand, quotation marks, a space between the words, and ever, exclamation point. This is the end of my sentence, so I don't need to put another space, and I'll end my quotation marks. And then I can click OK. And now pet name and pet type will change, but the sentence structure will stay the same. So again, if we run this, and this time I'm not going to put the prompts for the pet name or pet type, but just you already know how to do that. So try to include that in your programs, just some instructions for the user. Use that output shape to tell them, please enter this information, please enter that information. That's just a best practice, but this is just kind of showing how the program will run. All right, so I'm going to put in a pet name of Snowball and a pet type of cat. And it says Snowball is the cutest cat ever. If I run it again and I put Turbo as the name and Turtle as pet type, it says Turbo is the cutest turtle ever. So we can see that it's updating according to the input that I give it. So the process is very similar. These couple of examples just show you the difference between working with the numbers and working with the letters, the string data type. So just play around with Flowgorithm. It's pretty simple to use. Make sure you use that website with the instructions as well, and just focus on the logic of your program, translating that problem statement into the steps in your flowchart, so that you can solve whatever the requirements are for that program.